You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back to the show, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Nick Conn, who is the Chief Scientific Officer for Kasana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Roxy, for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is so good to have you here today. And this, I have a feeling, is going to be one of the most fun and interesting episodes we've recorded in a long time. No offense to our other guests, but we are talking about toilet seats today. So tell our audience a little bit about your background and what you've been innovating these days.
Of course. So my name is Nick, and I actually have my undergraduate, master's, and PhD in engineering from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Throughout my career, I had always been fascinated by medical devices and electronics, and I really ended up finding myself working in the field of cardiology, designing sensors that you can wear on your body. And one of the big challenges that I realized during this time was that people don't use these devices often. It's really hard to keep your devices charged or to put them on. So I had an opportunity during the PhD to propose how to do some in-home monitoring for industry funding. And we came up with the concept, and I said to my advisor, well, what if we throw electrodes on a toilet seat? That seems like a surefire way to get people to use our device. And it is a great concept, it turns out. And after a few proof of concepts, we received the grant funding, and we have a whole story to share with you today.
That's fantastic. Can't wait. Let's just peel the layers back one by one. So what has this journey been like to go from idea to concept to where you are today?
You know, it's been a roller coaster, starting really wanting to always have been an entrepreneur, but then going into academia to support that dream. Academia is a totally different world. And then transitioning from the research phase, writing publications, to creating a business plan, to going out and raising the seed funds. It was a whirlwind. And on top of that, COVID happened right as we were starting to pursue our Series A round. Yeah. So I've been able to flex a lot of different muscles over these years and learn a lot in everything from regulatory to the business plan side of things, and also be able to dive in deep to some of the technology aspects. So it's been fun.
So do you feel like you have an MBA now already too?
Mainly just by watching the experts do their thing.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. So let's just talk a little bit about the fundraising journey. What was that like for you? What were some of the obstacles? What was the market like when you were doing that compared to now?
So I started fundraising our seed round in 2019, and it took about 9 months for us to go from the beginning of fundraising to a seed round, which was great, but it was challenging. We're located in Rochester, New York. There's not a huge ecosystem here for gathering seed capital, and most of the companies that get funding locally they have revenue. There's been a reduced risk from having that revenue being on the market. And for medical devices where you need to go through the FDA, it was a challenge. We can't have revenue until we go through the FDA and clear our device. And it was a challenging time because the investors here we weren't the right company for them. And we have a great ecosystem. So there was a lot of support to help refine the story. I had really great, honest feedback, which after a few months was a little painful, but the story was able to become refined so that when I went outside of Rochester, I was able to secure some really great investment partners. And then once we had the seed round, which was a $2.2 million round led by Bemis Manufacturing, they're the largest toilet seat manufacturer in the US. A few of the local investors were able to come in and help close out that round. So it was a lot of work with a lot of no's before we got the few yeses that were really key.
Well, I imagine that even the no's were probably really interested in hearing this toilet story just as much as our listeners are today. At least you're getting their attention right out of the gate.
Exactly. I've never had to fight for investor attention when I would speak. you can see the second the toilet seat came up on the page, everybody's eyes light up, and there's the, oh, this must be a joke moment. And after you speak about it, everybody has that aha moment that you can tell very clearly where, wow, this really does integrate into people's everyday lives. You really do get these things for almost free. So the value almost sells itself.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about, today, remote patient monitoring and an Internet of Things. And what's happening with the trends around this today that's creating this window of opportunity for you, and where do you think we're going with these trends?
So COVID has, of course, accelerated a lot of this hospital to home monitoring and bringing medicine really to people's everyday lives. And it's a great time for Kasana, where we're looking to bring relevant and valuable data. There's many products that are leveraging some of the latest wireless technologies, battery technologies to start integrating into people's lives. But oftentimes the clinical utility of those devices are missing. And that's something that we feel really important. At Kasana, we're going after FDA clearance. We want to be a medical device and not just a toy. Many of these wearables and other in-home devices that focus on wellness are great, and they serve their own needs. They serve their own purposes, but it's really hard to use those for clinical decision making. So that's the space that we're really passionate about, and we want to be able to bring clinical grade value to the home.
So what makes a toilet a much more ideal solution? I mean, I think there's some duh part of it, but let's just talk about it. What is it that makes a toilet seat so much more compelling and valuable than maybe other remote patient monitoring devices that are available in the marketplace?
So the maybe most obvious but most powerful is that you use it almost every day. It's not a new behavior that you have to learn. Our device is completely self-contained, battery powered, and we have multiple years of battery life, so you don't need to recharge often. And it's such a great way to integrate and gather data. But one of the other really interesting pieces that makes our seat unique is the form factor from a sensors standpoint. We have skin contact and a lot of surface area to make contact with people without it being weird or unusual.
Right.
Watches are very small, and yet we have the whole surface area of a toilet seat to work with. And not only that, but you're not running around your everyday life. You're not trying to make sure that your feet are on the floor, that you've rested for 5 minutes before you get the cuff on, or you sitting at the right height with the cuff. All of these things to happen automatically on the toilet seat.
So I think the automation or the passiveness of what's happening is just so incredibly powerful. It makes me think of a personal story that just happened last night, where I went to Pilates, and I haven't taken Pilates classes in a while. So I had to scroll through. So before the class starts, I'm looking for the Pilates so I can record and get credit for my workout, right? And so, but class hasn't started yet. So I pull it up, I hit start, and I hit pause. And then I do the class, and I'm about 5 minutes before I'm ending, and I go, shoots, I never hit resume. So I never recorded anything because it requires
So frustrating.
to do something, whereas I don't have to do anything except sit down on the toilet. I imagine that you're going to have that continuity of data collection, of longitudinal data that's being collected really in a very different way than a lot of other devices.
There's a lot fewer points for failure. You don't have to put a device on correctly. You don't have to make sure that it's on the right part of your body. There's not a complicated set of steps that you need to go through. You
Yeah.
sit down, it starts recording. When you get up, it uploads to the cloud, and then everything just happens behind the scenes automatically to get those vital signs.
And just kind of explain a little bit of the power of being able to have that consistency of data collection compared to maybe traditional models of, only collecting data during on-site visits.
Absolutely. So if we think of hypertension as a perfect example, you go into the doctor's office and a decision is usually made on a single blood pressure reading that happens right then and there. Did you just run up the stairs? Were you late? Were you stressed out? Let alone white coat syndrome.
Right.
All of
Nervous.
these things, exactly, they can obscure what's really going on in your heart, in your physiology. So being able to go from one data point every 3 months, 6 months, a year, depending on how often you go to the doctor, we can get this data over time with a high degree of precision in the home, where it's not just once every few months, it's hopefully every day, every other day. We're able to get a blood pressure on you and see these real life, real world trends, because that's the pressure that matters. The pressures in your body and that you're going through everyday life with, not what it may happen to be that one day at the doctor's office.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit.
So one of the things that I think is so interesting about what you're doing is your business model, that you not only have identified, some of the lowest hanging fruit of use cases for you to be able to, validate demand, generate revenue, go through the FDA approval, generate revenue, but then also, to be able to position, I think you called it a toilet seat as a service.
Yes, SaaSes have become wildly popular lately, right? But we have a new spin where it's seat as a service.
Yep.
And there's a lot of value that comes from that, mainly because we can continue to innovate. If we have a next generation of product, we can roll out new sensor suites to folks. It fits really well with the reimbursement model as well, where it's a per patient per month system. There's existing reimbursement codes for being able to do this remote monitoring. And it fits really naturally with a product like ours that's meant to last multiple years. We don't want our device just to be thrown away after 3 or 6 months. This is something that can really help change people's lives for the long term.
Well, and I think of all the B2B organizations that would love to be able to have a device like yours just to kind of add to, as a value add to whatever else they're already doing for that foundational, consistent data flow.
Absolutely. There's a lot of data being gathered, even with wearables. That's great. Fitness data, how often, how many steps you take, those are incredibly useful, but they tend to become even more useful when paired with other measurements. So the seat measures heart rate, blood oxygenation, and blood pressure. And we have plans for many more biometrics that we believe we can capture just with the same form factor in the future. And when you have that data as the foundation, adding in steps, adding in medication information, sleep, all of these things start to fill in the puzzle piece of somebody's life. And it allows doctors to really make better decisions. We really view this as a partnership with the physicians, with the advanced practice providers who manage patients every day.
Well, and I think of the movement that's happened with the trend with DTX companies that have partnered with pharma in being companion care to the medication. And
Yes.
we even think about that portfolio expanding a bit for seat as a service to also be paired with that across the board. Why not?
Absolutely. There's so many different areas that can benefit from having this data. It's data that's never been captured before like this. We don't know what people's blood pressure does on a daily basis. We don't know how all of these things interplay if you measure it with this frequency over that long of a period of time. And there's a million different applications, which is a challenge for a startup. We have to stay laser focused. But there's so many different possibilities as we look to the future.
Definitely. So Is this easy? Is it difficult? I mean, when you talk about sensors on a toilet seat, like, why haven't we done it before?
Um, it is incredibly challenging. It's also something that people don't tend to talk about using the bathroom all that often.
Right.
And it's funny, and because I've created this technology, I tend to have these conversations with people, and you learn all these really interesting statistics about bathroom usage. And it's just something, though, that unless you feel comfortable talking about, you don't have the conversations. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it. But when we look at these other types of devices, and even the sensors we're leveraging in the seat, like a photoplasmogram, that's the same kind of sensor that's in a pulse oximeter that measures blood oxygenation. The
Mhm.
signal quality on the seat measured from the thigh is 10 to 50 times smaller than what you would get on your finger. There's some practical scientific and engineering challenges there to be able to make sure that you have robust data. And we've leveraged some of the more modern advances in semiconductor technologies, especially around sensors and instrumentation, to be able to gather this data with a high degree of fidelity.
Mm. Fantastic. So I noticed, in doing some of the research to prep for our interview today, I noticed that you have a couple of initiatives where you are involving patients in this process of being able to give feedback early on, both locally and, globally or nationally. Talk about, the motivator of including patients in kind of a co-creation process, and what are some of the things that maybe you've learned that were a surprise to you?
It's interesting. A lot of folks speak about customer discovery as being a super important part of designing your product and business plan. But we wanted to go one step further and really engage with people from the ground up to develop all aspects of the product.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, thinking about how do people perceive a device in their home? What matters to them? Um, do they want to see data? Do they not want to see data? And it's not just about working with the physicians, it's working with people to understand the motivations. Do they
Mhm.
want to monitor themselves? Do they want to monitor their elderly parents? That ends up being a really common thread that we hear, is that it's what the seat really can help bring is peace of mind. And it's something that we take very seriously.
I'm chuckling because it's kind of like, who would have thought, but it is very serious. And as a caregiver myself, that would just be incredible information for me to be able to have access to and insights into regarding my grandmother. Yeah.
Absolutely. And change in any behavior or pattern is telling, and it's useful information and important information for helping care for people. And what habit is more important than going to the bathroom? There's very few, I think, that fall to that level. But being able to track these things, there's endless opportunity around even urinary tract infections and other types of
Mhm.
challenges that arise when you can monitor this type of data.
Sure. Yep. So, how are you navigating the hype around innovation and IoT and RPM and all of these different things with the validity and science behind the work that you're doing?
So we make sure that we have scientific rigor at the heart of every single thing that we do. We work with third-party sites to validate the product so that we have objective, unbiased folks running these studies. We've run very, very large validation studies for blood pressure. As an example, a normal blood pressure cuff um, follows the ISO AMI standard, which allows you to measure on 85 subjects, 3 data points each. That's the scale of the study. To
Mhm.
test our device, in part because it's cuffless, we've tested on over 230 subjects, some of which have over 20 data points over a month-long period. So these kinds of studies have a lot of rigor, a lot higher power than you would expect from, say, a regular blood pressure cuff. And when we will be disseminating that work, it'll be very clear to the industry that this device measures what it claims to measure. It's not just some toy that hasn't really been thoroughly tested across a diverse group of people.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. So, as someone who is an engineer and a scientist, what has this entrepreneurship journey been like for you? What are some of the less experiences that you've had and some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
I've just been so blessed because it seems like every single step of the way, even though we've had many challenges, which I'll get to shortly, we've been very fortunate with the timing, with finding the right people at the right time, but building a company of folks that are just as passionate as I am, if not more so, sometimes about what we do. And just it takes a special kind of person to work at Kasana to build toilet seats for a living. We joke. But it ends up that we have a really great culture because of that, and a lot of dedicated folks. And watching that family grow has been really great for me. As far as challenges, there's been a few that we've had. One of the big ones was when the supply chain shortage hit. You couldn't buy any chips anymore. Many of the parts that we used to build the seat just were no longer available. So we had to pivot really quickly with our hardware, redesign a large portion of it, which is not necessarily straightforward when you have to do it under quality processes and make sure that you're doing it with the rigor required for the FDA. It ended up working out well for us, but it was a hairy period of time where who knew if we could make more than 500 of these? And it took a lot of hard work from a lot of people to get. The other area where I would say is a big lesson learned for me personally. There's a lot of resources on how to raise capital, how to craft your story and your pitch deck. But then once you've raised capital, then what? You have $2 million in the bank and you want to be a good steward, drive to the next milestone, increase the value of your business. And that's scary. That's hard. I feel like we did a good job, but one of the bigger challenges was outsourcing. Early on, it was really it felt like a great idea to be able to minimize our burn, be able to control our growth internally to make sure that we were only hiring the folks we needed. Yep. But one of the lessons learned is don't outsource core competencies. You want to be able to keep the things that are really, really critical to your success in-house, because consultants, while they have the best of intentions, they're not in the boat with you. They don't have to live with the decisions long-term that they make just by the nature of being consultants. So one of the things that we now do very intentionally, and if, looking back, and I give this advice to young entrepreneurs, be intentional about what you outsource and what you don't. Bring the people into the boat with you who need to be there to make sure that your business is successful.
It's interesting. I take clients through an exercise of identifying all of their resources and capabilities that they have in the organization. And then through that, identifying which ones are rare, which ones are substitutable, et cetera. And then those ones that are playing into their competitive advantage, it's just non-negotiable. It has to be internal. You can have strategic partners for every other component of the business, but you're right. Nothing to do with your competitive advantage or your core competency should be outsourced, because you want to be able to maintain control over that. Yeah, that's a great lesson.
Absolutely. And you can still leverage industry experts and consultants, but you should still have folks in the boat with you who are those experts. And that's served us well, and not just in the engineering side, but even in the regulatory side, and running clinical studies. We do a lot of studies in-house here in Rochester, engaging with the public, as we mentioned earlier. Anybody can come and sign up and participate in our SIT lab, our Smart Integrated Technologies lab.
Anyone can come.
And it's just so much fun. Exactly. And we call it Sit for Science, and you can help us really make the product better. The more butts we have on seats, the more robust we can make the product.
Oh my goodness. Your marketing team is just going to have a field day with their messaging and all their campaigns. I can just see it now.
We have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, lots to work with. That's for sure. So anything else that you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
I would say, please follow us on LinkedIn, find Kasana. If you're interested in our studies, or in Boston or in Rochester, New York, you can participate. We have questionnaires as well that help out during the business development process, our go-to-market strategy planning. But please follow us, stay up to date. We're going to be We have a very exciting year ahead of us as we go through the FDA clearance process, and we hope to be able to bring you the seat soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick. It's been great having you here today.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.